the whole thing from beginning to end and put it on the ballot. That's what our Michigan Constitution currently permits. We feel very strongly that this is a big mistake, that you should not allow, since the times have changed, you should not allow someone, whether they're from inside or outside, and unfortunately the egregious people seem to be from outside, to do this sort of thing, because what it does is it puts the voters in a terrible spot of now having to digest a very complicated and perhaps a whole new constitution in 3 months. And I would suggest to you that of all of these issues, that's probably the one that ought to receive the closest attention. The second one really relates to term limits in a couple of ways. We recommended, and I think anyone who pays any attention to local government notices this all the time, that if you're going to allow recall for local government, that you should not allow recall for political reasons. They ought to be for serious malfeasance of some kind. And in addition to that, we recommended, again, I think because we felt it would be impractical to remove the term limit for opposition entirely, that at least there should be 12 years in each house. I think if you were to poll the citizens for Michigan, which I can't really do anymore since we no longer are meeting, you probably would find that they would be in general agreement with a general term limit of, say, 20 years, which is about the same thing. The two 12-year terms would be 24 years. The idea in the end was that we think short term limits are a really kind of a foolish idea, because in fact every time you're on the ballot you are in fact term limited. All you have to do is have enough people who don't like what you did. And we've noticed over the years that there have been quite a lot of changes, and in fact I'm sure you've noticed that in the legislature. There's a different party now in charge of the House than there was 2 years ago. And a lot of people told me that those seats were very safe Republican seats. Well, apparently they weren't, because the voters ultimately make those decisions. So we felt fairly strongly that that should be changed. We thought it would be useful, and this is remarkable. We had a number of people who were, some of whom had served on the Supreme Court, and some of them had served on other courts, who came up with the idea that the higher courts, that is Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, should have a single term and should be appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate, and provide for some sort of partisan balance. That is, that they couldn't all be from one party. And the details of that would have to be worked out. We thought that might be a reasonable approach. We couldn't get unanimous, and certainly all of our recommendations were essentially unanimous. We couldn't get unanimous agreement that we ought to extend that to the local courts. We also recommended that all of the public university trustees, that is the ones of the big three, Michigan, Michigan State, and Wayne, should be appointed by the governor with the same kind of provision, as opposed to being elected statewide. I don't suppose many people have been through this, but I have actually stood for election twice for statewide office at governing boards. And I think it would be fair to say that in neither case, when I would go around the state, as I did some, to talk to voters, did most of them understand exactly what I was running for, nor in fact were they much interested. When I ran for the Wayne State Board of Governors in 1976, people thought I was being elected from Wayne County. It is an unusual thing to elect governing boards in any event, and it may have been a good idea at the time when, as it was the case before this current Constitution, that they were elected at a different election than everybody else. They were elected at a spring election, which was also incidentally the school election and local elections. So there was some focus at least on what they were running for. I would suggest to you that those offices are not considered by most voters to be particularly important. They're too worried about either who's running for president, vice president, the United States Senate, governor, and you know, terms in the legislature as well. In any event, those are some of the major recommendations we made. We made some other, I think, important recommendations that had to do with financial matters, but are, you know, rather than get into the details of those, I think it would be fair to say that there are serious problems there, and we had a broad range of people who were experts, including former state officials who worked on this. And I think there is a general feeling that perhaps between both the Headley Amendment and Proposal A, there's some overlap today, which has had a few unintended consequences and may, in fact, have led to what you're going through in Lansing right now. I think perhaps there were some shifts that were made that sounded like a pretty good idea at the time. I think you can now tell maybe don't work so well. In any event, we really appreciate, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of the people who spent this time for your interest in this subject. We hope that there will be some changes recommended and placed on the ballot between now and 2010. And there's certainly plenty of time for that. And the fact that you're getting out and getting discussion on this particular issue, I think, will lead to that. Without a certain amount of education, I think the voters usually are not too interested in constitutions too much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me just
I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Yeah, let me just ask you a couple questions. On the front page here, you have you as yourself, the chairperson, vice chairperson Frank Kelly. Who else was on the board? And then you talked about the 20 individuals. If you could just talk about the makeup of the committee that worked on this.
I'd be happy to. I'll read to you.
I didn't get that far.
I'll read to you the people who served. Other people were Madge Berman, who's actually a citizen member interested in transportation. Dan DeGrow, I think you know Dan DeGrow. David Deagle, who is the finance director for Macomb County. Deborah Dingle, who has a very famous husband who's a congressman in Washington, D.C., and who works in government. Robert Elveld, who's a lawyer from Grand Rapids and formerly very active in the Republican Party, has run for office. Peter Fletcher is a former Republican National Committeeman. Harry Gass served in the Michigan House and then in the Senate. And he actually has been in government so long that he was an elected county supervisor. John Hertel, who served in the state senate and in both and on both the boards of commissioners of Wayne and Macomb counties, and was chairman of both. Paul Hilligans, who was the former Speaker of House in the Michigan legislature. Frank Kelly, who was the longest serving state attorney general in the history of the United States. McManus was in the House of Representatives. Shelley Padnos, who is a citizen member from the Holland area. Brooks Patterson, who is the Oakland County executive. Phil Power, who quite coincidentally, since serving on our board, has formed his own organization to study government, which is